Hot take, meetings suck.
I think that's actually the coldest take ever, Kyle.
Okay, Kayla, you are right. We all know meetings suck, but what we don't know is how to solve them. Well, you're going to now because we talk to Rebecca Hinds, the leading expert on how to make meetings more effective or get rid of them altogether. You're going to love this episode. Let's get into it.
Before we get into today's episode, Kyle, have you heard of the allergy symptom threshold?
Yeah, is that when someone is so annoying while whining about their spring allergies that everyone reaches their limit and won't hang out with them ever again?
No, wait, are you talking about me?
I didn't want to say anything, but you complaining about itchy eyes and stuffy nose is bothering us all, Kayla. You gotta get help.
Rude. No, the allergy symptom threshold explains why allergy symptoms sometimes come on suddenly. Think of the threshold as an empty glass that fills as you're exposed to different allergens. When you encounter just one or two allergens, you might feel fine, but an increase in another can cause your glass to fill to capacity, causing symptoms like sneezing and itchy eyes.
Whoa, is that the same for everyone?
Well, everyone's symptom threshold is different. It depends on immune system sensitivity and the number of allergens present. Luckily, you can figure out how to avoid hitting that threshold with an allergy blood test, which can help to rule in or rule out allergies. And if your provider orders a regional respiratory profile, it will help ensure no allergen slips through the cracks with a research-backed collection of local pollen allergens and the most common indoor allergens all from one blood draw.
Okay, so please tell me you're getting this allergy blood test soon.
Right after this podcast. And you can too. Ask your primary care provider about getting tested with your local respiratory allergy profile today. And thanks to our friends over at Allergy Insider for this PSA.
Okay, we have a special guest on today's episode of Per My Last Email. It is Rebecca Hinds. Rebecca is a leading expert on organizational behavior and the future of work. She holds a BA, MS, and PhD, 3 for 3, from Stanford University, where her research focused on how emerging technologies reshape work. She also founded the Work Innovation Lab at Asana and the Work AI Institute at Glean. And she is the author of the book, Your Best Meeting Ever, 7 Principles for Designing Meetings That Get Things Done, which is what we're very excited to talk about with you, Rebecca, today. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So we'll just start with talking about meetings. They basically are the thing that everyone loves to hate, hates to
love.
hates to love, all of the things. So we figured we'd have a meeting about it, which is essentially what a podcast is, an unstructured, terrible meeting, to talk about why meetings suck. But why do meetings suck? What inspired you to write this book?
Well, exactly that. The fact that they suck and they have sucked for so long. You know, if we go back to the 1960s, meetings looked pretty much the same as they do right now. Now we're in more meetings than ever before. And in some ways they've become more dysfunctional. But in terms of the design, or moreover, the lack of design, we haven't taken a step back and fundamentally redesigned how we do meetings, how we think about meetings. And so often we use them as a knee-jerk reaction to all of our problems, when meetings are so expensive in terms of time cost, our sanity cost as well, where we need to be much more strategic about how we deploy them.
I love that. And I think everyone that listens to the show can relate. We all have meetings that we absolutely hate. We want to get better at doing meetings. We want to maybe eliminate meetings altogether. So Kaila and I went through and picked out our favorite parts from your book that we thought were really tactical, that the audience would love some more insight on. So I want to start with the nuclear option. We'll start somewhere small. Meeting Doomsday, which is just delete all your meetings for 2 days and see what happens. Should people hit the nuclear, the big red button right away and just delete their meetings? Is that a good strategy?
Often. I mean, this requires a lot of preparation, and it is a very thoughtful, I call it a meeting doomsday. It is very thoughtful despite being, a bold, radical move. But often, and we all feel it, our calendars are packed with these legacy meetings that have been on our calendar for weeks, months, years. And often we get in the rhythm of scheduling, as opposed to thinking carefully about, does this actually deserve to be a meeting? A big problem with meetings in general is they are social activities. And when we schedule a meeting, we're essentially establishing a social contract with another person such that we feel obliged to show up for the meeting. And we often feel a sense of guilt associated with canceling it or pushing back. And so part of the meeting Doomsday, it gives employees the permission to push back on meetings, explicit permission, in a way that doesn't establish so much of that guilt we all feel, where we don't just feel like we're canceling the meeting, we sort of feel like we're canceling the person behind the meeting as well.
Yeah, I totally feel that. And there's been instances where I'm like, I really am too busy for this. Like, I cannot, this is not a value add meeting. I'm going to cancel it. And I'm still like, I'm so sorry. Like, can we push this to a different day? And
You're still my best friend.
Yeah, everyone's like, it's fine. It's not a big deal. But I guess once you've pressed that nuclear option and you've been meeting free for 2 days, it's time to revisit what was actually useful and what wasn't. And how do you figure out what was and what wasn't, besides nothing broke? Because if nothing breaks, then why add anything back at all? Unless that's kind of the point.
Well, exactly. And often when I work with organizations, when we think about the frequency of meetings, how often we schedule meetings, usually a good gut check into, can you meet less frequently, is, does the work continue to move forward? Is nothing lost in the process of meeting less frequently, is a useful exercise to go through. Now, pre-AI, we thought long and hard about what are those dimensions that are useful and also easy for employees to evaluate their meeting. And so we typically align on effort and impact as those two dimensions. Effort in terms of how much effort does the meeting consume before, during, and in all the follow-up, as well as impact. So how impactful is the meeting in terms of helping you reach your goals? That tends to be, it's not perfect, but it tends to give employees some good guardrails in terms of, if you have a high effort meeting with low impact, those are ones that you probably aren't going to want to bring back. Now, post AI, it becomes very exciting because I work with a lot of organizations who do invest heavily in AI, and they have these technologies that can help make that determination for employees. So query the AI tool, it knows enough about you, your organization, your team, where it can recommend, probably this meeting isn't worth your time, versus this is a meeting that consistently moves your work forward, and there are action items out of those, and the action items are followed up on. So it becomes more and more exciting. But in general, if we're consuming a lot of time in the meeting, it's not worth the time we're investing. That's a good sense that we probably don't need to bring those meetings back.
I'm picturing this AI tool like messaging the organizer of the meeting, being like, your meeting has been deemed not impactful and canceled. Do better next time. I have one more question on the social contract piece, the social nature, because I'm hearing what you're saying. Me and Kayla work at the Morning Brew office, so we're getting our social interactions with our coworkers just walking around. So I'm like, yeah, delete all the meetings. That's great. I can go talk to Jen at the water cooler. I'm thinking for remote employees, you hit the nuclear button. They're like, there goes all of my time where I am talking to my coworkers, where I am forming those social bonds. How do you think about that in the context of an emerging hybrid kind of default way of working?
It's really important. And in the book, I also outline what I call the 4D CEO test. It's essentially a test to determine whether a meeting needs to exist. The 4Ds: debate, discuss, develop, yourself or your team, is one of those other key Ds. Meetings serve a very important purpose in terms of developing ourselves, our team bonds. Now, what I think is a misconception is, often we think that the best way to establish connection is through a meeting, where we know that there's so much research to suggest that is not often the case. Doing something like going out to dinner with a colleague, or doing some shared interest. Sometimes it's called a multiplex relationship, where we know when we have relationships with our colleagues that go beyond work, those tend to be more trustworthy relationships. We tend to rely on them more heavily, and they tend to be more impactful. Now, it becomes less and less feasible to be able to do that in a remote setting. setting. But still, in almost every remote organization I've worked in, you have remote hubs where you have a set group of coworkers in a given location where you can start to organize other activities that move beyond the work, as well as start to think about how do we use digital channels to not necessarily just hold meetings, but to bond over shared interests, or share the cat memes and bond outside of the work setting, because those relationships are they're fewer and far between as we get more and more into this age of efficiency, and yet they're absolutely important in moving work forward and developing strong bonds.
Love that. Me and Kaila have a happy hour after this, so we have our multiplex relationship.
Exactly. So let's move on to everyone's favorite topic, agendas. I don't know about you, but I certainly have been both in and leading meetings where we are basically going in blind. We meander through all of our topics. We're not really sure exactly what we want to achieve. And though I do think that there is, some benefit to just kind of like, shooting the shit with our coworkers, maybe at the dinner and not at the meeting. One thing that I really loved that you suggested is thinking about agendas and agenda items as action oriented instead of just identifying a topic. So instead of saying, we're going to talk about a budget update, it's how do we decide the budget or define the budget? So when you're thinking about building the best possible and most effective agenda, how do you structure that?
It's a great question. And I became really fascinated by this in the course of doing research for the book. In particular, there's actually no concrete evidence that having an agenda actually improves our meetings.
Really?
That's
which is
news to me, yeah.
Counterintuitive.
You've
because
been doing
we're all
it right.
told
Exactly.
that's the advice that's doled out is, having a meeting agenda. That's sort of meeting hygiene 101. But it's often because it's not just about having the agenda, just like it's not just about holding the meeting. So often in our organizations, we do these things to be performative, to look like we've done something, to feel official, right? The agenda gives a perception that we prepared for the meeting. But usually we don't think a lot about how we design the agenda. Often they're recycled. It's, in many organizations, 50% of agendas will be recycled week after week for those recurring meetings. If we convert the agenda items to jobs to be done, what are we trying to accomplish with each agenda item? That tends to be much more effective. And so my recommendation, as you've articulated, is to convert each agenda item into a combination of a verb and a noun. So rather than the budget discussion, you're saying approve the Q3 budget as the verb, or instead of a project update, you're saying, finalize this specific feature for the product launch. And that has a couple different positive impacts. One, it gives people clarity in terms of, what is happening in the meeting. Do I need to be in the meeting? And it enables you to move on once you've done the verb. We also see in the case of agendas, people spend disproportionately more time on the first agenda item, and they tend to spend disproportionately more time on the least important items. Sometimes this is called the law of triviality, where we spend disproportionately more time on things that are more trivial, because they're easier to weigh in on, right? We all, in general, like to hear our voice represented in meetings. We feel a need to contribute in most cases. And so we tend to latch on to these trivial items that often don't move work forward. The weekend updates, the sharing of introductions, the font sizes on the page, and that can be a negative impact of a lack of design of the agenda as well.
Very interesting. I also think a benefit is you can decide if the meeting was successful. Like if the meeting is discuss budget, like we discussed it, like, yeah, but if it's like decide budget, did you or not, it just gives you a lot of clarity on like, did we accomplish what we wanted to accomplish? I want to talk about not the agenda now, but the people who are going to interact in the meeting. And you could have the best agenda in the world, but if the wrong butts are in the wrong seats, like you're not going to actually accomplish what you need to accomplish. And you talk about this like Google principle that Larry Page had, and the like cap of number of people that should be in the meeting. I think it was 8. And that maybe is directionally correct. But what I have seen in my career is there's something like a attendance inflation, where as the longer the meetings keep recurring, the more people get added to them, and it becomes a power thing or a proxy thing or a status thing. And then it becomes death by committee, where there's so many people in the meeting you can't actually get anything done. How do you stop meeting inflation, Rebecca? Tell us.
So and what you're talking about, I think it's acutely a problem in meetings, but this is a problem in every facet of our organizations. My colleague Bob Sutton will call it addition sickness, right? We know as humans, we are hardwired to solve problems through addition. And we all see it, we throw more money at the problem, more people, more meetings, more meeting agenda items, more everything, more meeting minutes. Meetings tend to balloon in size as well in terms of length and duration. And so what the research shows, and this is fantastic research by Leidy Klotz, who's at University of Virginia, what he's shown is if you explicitly prime people to subtract, it dislodges that addition sickness and they start to adopt a subtraction mindset. And it's often not that we hate subtraction. It's often that it doesn't even occur to us as an option, right? As we're adding a new stakeholder, it doesn't even occur to us that perhaps we should remove an existing one as well to keep that meeting more concise, more full of stakeholders rather than spectators. And so a useful activity across every dimension of the meeting, duration, frequency, agenda items, and attendees is how can you keep the meeting lean? If we are adding, how can we think about subtracting as well and do that at a consistent cadence over time?
Love that advice.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll be right back after this. Okay, back to the show. You mentioned a little bit about how people like to hear their voices heard. And so therefore,
that's why we got a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. We definitely love to hear our own voices. But then when you're in a meeting, there are these energy sucks. And one of them is a dominating voice, a power voice, I think you called it. And it's so annoying. Everyone has experienced it, right? Like somebody just won't shut up and they're usually like higher ranking. So it's not like you can pull them aside and be like, hey, next time, let's be a little quieter in the meeting. It feels very counterproductive as well. So how do you handle that?
And you've articulated the hardest part of this is often this is highly correlated with status and power within the organization. And one of my favorite, phenomenons, my favorite in terms of it's super interesting and fascinating, but it's also frustrating, is what's sometimes called the Babel hypothesis. We know that the more someone speaks in a meeting, the more they're perceived to be a leader. So it's not just annoying, right? It actually skews our perception of who's in the room. And so this is where, we need to be very intentional about airtime. Equal airtime in meetings and outside of meetings as well, is one of the strongest predictors of team performance. We know that. And so thinking about the performance gains, I think is important when we think about, it's not just equality, it's not just, a better atmosphere. This is a hard driver of performance within organizations. Now, previously, there were various tactics you could put into place. In the best cases, leaders recognize this and they recognize the amplification of their words in meetings. So I tell the story in the book of Pixar and, Ed Catmull, when he was at Pixar with Steve Jobs as the CEO, they made a deal where Steve Jobs would sit out of those critical meetings where they were critiquing early stage films, because both of them recognized that Jobs in the room meant that people would be swayed and influenced in a way to, sugarcoat ideas or downplay criticism. So the best case is leader awareness. Now, increasingly, tools, AI can help with this as well, because you start to have a more objective force acting in the meeting, flagging, the monologues, the disproportionate airtime hogging of the senior executives. And I've used these tools to quite great success in terms of you're no longer a lower rank person, even if it's an outsider who's been brought in to the organization to help with some of these problems, there still is politics at play. When you have an AI tool or a technology flagging, and often not in terms of surveillance, often it's, the leader isn't even aware of how much they're talking in meetings. Once they have that information, pretty quickly, most of them, not all, but start to self-correct. And some of these tools now go so far as to, flag it in the moment to say, look at this distribution and try to, let's try to dial it back. Again, it's, it can be touchy-feely when it's human to human, but once you're starting to bring forth more objective information and insight, that tends to be more effective.
I love that we're going to have a bot that tells you that your meeting is not effective enough and has been canceled, and a bot that tells you you're talking too much. Be quiet.
Monologue. Okay, Rebecca, I want to talk about now another subject that I feel like is a lightning rod for controversy. The meeting-free day. Lots of people hate it. Lots of people love it. I personally, I'm a big fan of this in principle. Kaila hates it. So
I'm not a fan.
We're tied 1-1. I need you to break the tie. Do you like meeting-free days? And Rebecca, why am I right?
So, the answer, as it often is in a research context, it depends.
We wanted you to pick a side.
We needed a tiebreaker.
I personally am a fan, but I recognize that in so many organizations, it's just not feasible. And in particular, the more geographically dispersed the organization is, the harder this is because you're having to navigate more and more time zones, as well as the level of customer interactions, external interactions, stakeholder interactions, that heavily dictates how feasible this is within organizations. From a research perspective, no meeting days are very exciting and effective because they protect against what's sometimes called the contracting time effect. And I think we've all felt this, where it's 9 a.m., we only have one meeting in the day, it's at 4 p.m., but we are fixated on that 4 p.m. meeting. And as soon as it comes on our calendar, this mental countdown starts where we are anticipating that meeting, and either consciously or subconsciously, we avoid diving into incredibly deep work because we know it's coming. Mm-hmm. And so that is one of the big benefits of no meeting days, is the mental countdown doesn't start when you don't have any meetings on a day. There's fascinating research as well to show it improves cooperation because people start to have to develop asynchronous ways to communicate and more intentional. It also tends to reduce micromanagement because managers can no longer anchor so heavily on meetings to surveil their team and track every task and action item. They have to start trusting their teams more. So there are so many benefits, but in some organizations, it just isn't feasible.
Super helpful. I have a quick question that's adjacent to this, and you might know some research around this topic. I'm personally a big fan of time blocking. So if I can't have no meeting days that are state sanctioned, I try to create my own through putting a block on my time. This is where I'm going to do deep work. Now no one can schedule over it. Is that effective, or am I just gaslighting myself with these meetings?
No, that's very effective because you're taking control of your calendar, right? Especially if you make it explicit on your calendar. That is one of my biggest recommendations for people in organizations where there isn't a shared commitment to meeting hygiene. We can do a lot to protect our own calendar, and you can even get creative with the naming. It's your strategic thinking time, instead of just busy. And you can, the more we frame it as intentional, deep work that is critical to moving work forward, I think the more that tends to be effective as well.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And especially when I didn't know this concept of waiting for being less productive before the meeting, but I 100% have been I've got 45 minutes before my next meeting. I shouldn't start a deep project. I should do busy work. I should open my email and click on a few, maybe get rid of some marketing emails. So I think that's very important to remember, and probably 1 point towards the no meeting days. I'll concede on that. So one thing we talk about as well when we're talking about meetings is the pre-read. So basically this is homework essentially before a big meeting. And I personally love a pre-read. I think it's similar a little bit in the way that the agenda is it's kind of signaling that you're prepared for the meeting, but it's also asking, everyone else to kind of get up to speed so that the meeting can be about discussion, decisions, productive, behaviors. What do you think about the pre-read? Is it effective, or is it just another thing that you're going to have to end up reading or going through at the beginning of the meeting anyways, because half the people aren't going to read it?
I'm a big fan. I'm a massive fan of pre-reads, but again, they need to be well designed. Just, having a pre-read will not magically make the meeting better. And Amazon is the organization that has sort of ushered in this era of pre-reading. And what they're essentially doing is raising the bar for what deserves to be a meeting, because often you'll go through the exercise of doing the pre-read and you'll either discover that, wow, I don't actually need a meeting to do this. Once I've written down the thoughts, it's clear that we can do this asynchronously. That is often the effect. Or you realize that, wow, we can do a lot of the things that we were going to do live in the meeting through the pre-read instead. And so often that is another positive benefit, where you realize that perhaps we can't cancel or eliminate the entire meeting, but perhaps we can eliminate the status update portion of it, where, so much of our meeting culture is driven by information exchange, where that is not a good purpose of a meeting, is for information exchange. Often that is something that the pre-read can do. And again, increasingly AI can help with this, because if it knows enough about your organization, about the people in the room, about your business objectives, it can put together and craft that pre-read in a way that doesn't require as much human heavy lifting.
I love that perspective, and it just made it to me so apparent that there's like this asymmetry in meetings versus work. Meetings, it's so easy to schedule. There's no friction. And what a pre-read does is increase the friction. So scheduling the meeting becomes harder, and then you end up only with meetings that are worth the friction, which I think would solve a lot of problems. Rebecca, I want to move us to our game now. So we have a special game for you that we're calling So Crazy It Just Might Work. Now, these are tactics that me and Kaila thought of. They didn't make it in your book because they're a little out there, but we were inspired and we wanted to bring some of our own meeting tactics to the expert. So you decide if this would actually be effective or not. So crazy, it just might work. Kaila, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So the problem is people taking too long in meetings, talking too much. The solution, a shot clock that starts counting down every time somebody starts talking. Crazy? It just might work? What do you think?
So, and I think I haven't seen any of the other questions, but in general, my philosophy around crazy things is usually they can work very effectively, because
here we go.
We are so ingrained in our meeting habits where, half the problem is jolting people out of the status quo. And, one of the hidden benefits of writing a book on meetings is everyone shows up really prepared and everyone shows up on time. And that, that's a jolt out of the status quo that doesn't require any of these strategies in the book, right? It just requires being more intentional and thinking differently. So in this case, yes, I think there's a real danger of over-indexing on any metric. And when we're thinking about countdown clocks, which I've seen in real organizations, be used very effectively, there's a danger of over-indexing on that and, making the meeting hyper efficient. But it tends to jolt people out of the status quo, because what it does is it makes people more aware of the time in the meeting and the cost of the time, and visibly counting down the time tends to create an atmosphere where people take the meeting minutes more seriously, and as a result, the meeting more seriously as well.
I love the idea of the shot clock, and it made me think of like we have like national debt clocks. Yeah. We could have like a meeting salary clock, and like as the meeting increases in time, you take all of the money that you'd be paying all the employees in the meeting. That could be effective too. Okay, Rebecca, I have another So Crazy It Just Might Work for you. If someone comes to you and asks, "Hey, I'd like to attend this meeting that you've organized," you have to look them dead in the eye and ask them, "Well, are you a stakeholder or are you a spectator?" So Crazy It Just Might Work. Thoughts?
I don't think it's crazy. I think that's what we should. I think that's what we should be doing, right? We should be. I think as the organizer, the onus is partially on you to help with that determination. But this is an activity we should be doing with all of our meetings in terms of, are you a stakeholder? Are you a spectator? And do you deserve to be in the meeting? And that being part of our meeting culture.
I have a tactical question for you there, because I think what people struggle with is saying no to someone who wants to attend a meeting. We talked about this. Like, do you have a script? How would you approach that conversation if someone said, hey, could I join this meeting? What's an appropriate way to say no without feeling like an asshole?
This is where I think the pre-read and documentation help a lot, communicating, okay, this is the purpose of the meeting. These are, we want to keep the meeting crisp and on track and efficient. But hey, we recognize that this information is very important for you and can be useful for you. We're going to send the follow-ups, the pre-read in this format, in this location. And if you decide that you felt like your contributions in real time would have been helpful to you or the others in the room, then let's, discuss again. But having that, a lot of people feel understandably the sense of FOMO associated with meetings. The more we can make visible and explicit what has actually happened in the meeting, the less people feel that sense of FOMO because they're able to consume that information on their own time.
I think that's wonderful advice. And also then they have to do some homework themselves, going back to this friction part. Like they have to read the pre-read and then actually be informed and then come to you with a well thought out reason why they should be involved as opposed to just asking. So really, really strong tactic. Okay. Another so crazy it just might work. We're going to take the total time people are late over 1 quarter. 3 minutes here, 10 seconds here, 5 minutes there, 7 minutes. You were really late there. We add it all up. And at the end of the quarter, we take your hourly pay multiplied by the number of hours you were total late and we deduct it from your pay.
So I've seen this and I've read about this and studied this.
I thought we were coming up with crazy ideas. You're like, I do all of these things.
We were doing some ridiculous stuff here, I thought.
No, I mean, it's not common, but I think Andreessen Horowitz, I hope I'm not getting that right, but there have been examples of where you have not necessarily that approach, but you have a money jar and you have to put the money in the money jar when you're late.
Ooh.
But I think, I think the better solution, I do think this can be effective for certain groups and cultures. The better solution is to figure out why people are late, because usually it's one of two reasons. One, they don't feel the meeting is worth their time. They're not motivated to show up on time. And that's a good indication that maybe they don't need to be in the meeting, and you can call the attendees, or they're double booked. And, there's so much meeting overwhelm that people aren't able to get to the meeting on time, given their other commitments. And then it's a question of, okay, stepping back, does this meeting need to happen? We know that not only are people late, they're probably coming to meetings thinking about the last meeting and coming cognitively taxed because of it. And so thinking about the system, I think, is a more effective tactic.
Yeah, beautiful answer. I feel like you need to be like an Olympic sprinter to get from one conference room to the next in time for meetings now.
All right, we got 2 more. The So Crazy Just Might Work pop quiz on the pre-read.
Pop quiz on the pre-read. Oh, that's a good one.
Yes.
We got it.
I think we got Rebecca on this one. And if you get it wrong, you're booted from the meeting.
Or shamed publicly in some really embarrassing way.
No. Well, then I have an answer. No, I mean, I think the reality of our organizations is it's not feasible to, in an ideal world, everyone would read the pre-read and read it well. I think the reality is not the case. And again, I think it's important to understand, okay, what is driving people not to have time to complete the pre-read? And, sometimes, just as Amazon did, a healthy practice in these cases is to devote time during the meeting for folks to read the pre-read. Now, I don't recommend, I think in the ideal situation, people do their homework. The reality, I think, is less rosy. So sometimes building in time for the pre-read can be an effective way to ensure people read the pre-read.
Last one for you, Rebecca. Audio issues. They pop up a lot of times in hybrid, or you have remote employees. They're lagging. You get the, can you hear me now? Oh, I'm sorry, I think my Wi-Fi's down. Let me switch to 5G. So new rule, you got audio issues, immediately booted from the meeting. Get up your Wi-Fi game and come back to us. Thoughts?
It's a hard one too. I think presence, it depends how many people are in the room, I would say. What we know about audio, which is fascinating, is as audio quality degrades, we tend to trust people less as well, because our mind goes to, okay, if this is so hard to hear why. I don't fully trust what you're saying either. And so there are these big, I don't think many people and organizations, I certainly didn't until doing research for this book, appreciate just how important audio quality is. But sometimes, life happens. You're in an airport. I've been in those situations before where sometimes the presence in the meeting, even if there's, a degrading audio quality, matters more. I think it's context dependent, just how bad is the audio quality and how many people are in the room.
That's right. I think that this is fascinating. I love that the research you had, which is like, if your audio is bad, we actually trust you less, which feels wrong, but like, I admit it happens. I also think in that case, sometimes, like if you're in an airport, I'm guilty of this. Like, you're like, I need to be in this meeting, so I'll take it from the bathroom of like a Marriott. You don't need to be in the meeting most of the times. Like, it's okay to just say, I'm traveling. You'll fill me in after. Here's my thoughts ahead of the time, but like, I trust you. I think that's a move more people ought to do. And then also just good Wi-Fi setup at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like that's all we have time for.
That's all we have time. If this podcast was a meeting, I would say we could keep doing it.
Yeah.
This was very successful.
Shot clock, continue to count down.
I learned a lot. Rebecca, one, thank you so much for joining us. Yep. Like, this was a really lovely, fun, informative conversation. But two, thanks for writing this book, because I do think meetings are this just stubborn thing people can't figure out. Your book is incredibly tactical, but also like so research backed, which I really appreciated. And I felt like I learned a ton about the science of meetings and like human psychology from the book. So really appreciate you. Thanks for joining us on Permalast Email.
Thank you. This was so fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Rebecca. Let's roll the credits. Our producer is Michaela Heck.
Our technical director is Lonnie Fiskus.
Brittany DeTaco is our audio engineer.
And our president is Devin Everett.
This show is a production of Morning Brew.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
See y'all.